For my free folk list, I decided to bring Tormund as my commander, and I've kind of kitted him out in a not so spammy fashion, but I feel like this is a little bit more on the elite side of free folk. We've got Thens with Harma, 2 units of cave dwellers. He's sitting in the followers, and then I've got Ygritte and Styre. And Ygritte should be putting work into my opponent's Tyrion list, which is a little bit more elite. The combo of Walder Frey and Joffrey is pretty nice, but we're looking at a lot of beefy things, like really expensive things. So hopefully Tormund can kind of section them out and get rid of the big things as he sees fit. We are playing on Dance with Dragons today, so Tormund's kind of going way up towards the top so he can grab the objectives there. My opponent's decided to kind of let that top edge of the table uh, be open. You know, he's not really fighting against it a whole lot. I think after we had finished the game, we talked about how maybe being on the a little more up on the screen would be better for those mountains men. But we start the turn off with my opponent having turn one, and Walder Frey comes down on the maneuver position right away. My opponent's played against Free Folk enough to know that that is one of the zones that I really like to have to get some of my cards kind of turned up a little bit. Also, it's just nice to be able to get this big block of dudes running early. Now, one of the things that you'll notice I didn't talk about during the list, uh, primer, is I'm playing 4 points down, but now you can see I've got all these wolves out here too. So I am testing out skin changers, and I brought 4 of them with me just to kind of tilt them to the extreme to see what they're all about. So Harma's unit of Thens has a skin changer, or has a skin changer with a bear. Then the cave dwellers on the bottom have a bear. Tormund's unit has a bear, and then I think it was maybe one of the raider units has the other bear. Yeah, I think it's a raider unit, and I think that in hindsight, I probably could have taken one of the bears out for a hawk. Having 4 bears is cool, but I think the eagle, sorry, whatever it is. Um, I think the eagle's pretty sweet, especially since there are certain charges you just kind of want to have happen. But the I I think I missed it a little bit, but Walder Frey had influenced, I think, Harma's unit so that he could turn off the follow me order, and I used Ygritte to try and get rid of Walder Frey's influence, but my opponent pitched what most of us would consider at the elite unit level a not so great card to have, and that was just Lannister pays his debts. So he was able to get rid of that, and it's not the greatest for me because I was hoping to put some pressure to get rid of good cards with Ygritte, but usually it seems like you just pitch the worst one you've got. And that was Lannister pays his debts. So I've got the first uh, bear unit kind of went. So I've decided to, the way I'm proxying all of this out is I have enough bears or wolves for the Stark families, and each one of the skin changers is the person who controls the dog, and that way I know which one needs to go where. So like Jon Snow and Ghost are doing their thing, and I think it's the other 3 that are out there too. So one of the hard things that's gonna one of the hardest things for me to get over in this game is going to be trying to cut through some of these more elite units, especially with Walder Frey out there, because he can kind of just shut down the units that are more threatening, like cave dwellers. Thankfully, Tormund's got the ability to kind of shred these too, but a Dance with Dragons is an interesting scenario for a list like this. My list is wide enough to where I don't mind, or I don't have anything that's like, it doesn't. I'm going to start over. I have plenty of bodies to put onto objectives. Like, that's not a huge deal for me. And one of the reasons why I picked this list out of my pair instead of the Harma list that I have is I wanted to make sure I could get the Thens in here to kind of have a little bit more survivability, and have Harma's order to try and slingshot a unit up a little further to try and stop them from getting to objectives before I do. The issue with this is that Tormund is a real fighty commander. Like, the followers of Bone are such a sweet unit, and this is before the update that just recently came out that gives them vicious and a better attack stat. if Tormund's unit can connect first with full ranks, which is pretty likely to happen, especially if you're doing things like playing uh, regroup and reform, or I forget which Tormund card it is that lets him put 4 wounds or 6 wounds back into his own unit when they charge. So I can't remember what it was. Um, but if you can get that first smash at 8 dice with Sundering, I think it's really good. And they also have the best ability to trigger Overrun because they do throw so many dice. And now, since they have Vicious on top of that, it's even better because you could realistically wipe a unit out in one go if they were really unlucky. And if you're using the bear along with them, or someone else's bear along with them, then it's a pretty sweet deal. But the problem is that Tormund is trying to be more killy in this game, and I've got him on the side of the table where there are no units, and he's just got the objective. So Tormund's sitting in a pretty pricey unit for free folk, or by free folk standards, just to babysit an objective, because it doesn't seem like anything's really going to be coming over to me anytime soon, especially with that corpse pile kind of being in the middle there. And then after that, Tormund's just kind of hobbling up the table at 2 inches at a time. So my opponent's he's putting his warrior sons out there pretty far. I think that he's pretty comfortable with the fact of their survivability. Their save is only a 4+, so in the early parts of the game, it's not going to look so hot for them. But as they lose more wounds, they should be a little bit more survivable as long as they're passing their tests. And I think the Mountains Men over here are just kind of setting up for something that will come in, because I think he knows that the warrior sons are going to get charged, and things are going to get a little screwy there. You will notice there are a lot of cuts in this one. So we had a few kind of discussion points, especially with one of the cards that we have not kind of showing right for the warrior sons, and with that, especially since my opponent's trying out a new list, we had to kind of chop out some things. So it might get a little jumpy, but I don't miss anything, so you don't have to worry so much about that. So Harma's unit goes along with the bear. So check out this sweet transition for the next turn. Okay, so that was a little choppy and maybe a little corny, but ever since Mythicos showed off their sweet camera track, I had to get myself one. So a little bit more programming for me can save me some of the choppy editing, but I think it's a really sweet deal. Now, before we went off to turn 2, that Cave Dweller unit with the bears on the bottom of the screen, they didn't really maneuver up that much. I was kind of worried about the flayed men coming into them first, which I really shouldn't have been, because my opponent's probably prerogative is to get on that objective and then go from there. I should have been more aggressive with them instead of kind of hindering them right now because of the way that the bears move. It makes it very difficult to kind of negotiate the situation I put myself in. So important stuff in the middle of the screen. I've charged off with a Skin Changer unit into the Warrior Sons. They just lose a couple wounds, no big deal, and then they pass their morale test, which is good for them. So now their bear is going to go through the woods over to the side of the Warrior Sons. With that, I need at least a 2 to get there, and I do make it, no problem. So I decide to go on the other side because I don't want to be blocking the raiders that are coming on the front on the other side. So it kind of looks screwbally that I've put the bear on that, or that I've put the bear and the raiders on that side, because the Mountains Men can come in and do a lot of work, and then maybe the bowmen can get that bear. But I want to make sure that I can get that other unit in, and with that I should be able to make sure that one of the units will survive to trigger off a group assault that I've got. Now, one of the things that I also skimmed over real quick was that the Warrior Sons took the wound, of course, because they have to. And with Vicious and the neg one from the side and that corpse pile being there, the Warrior Sons failed their morale test by a decent number. So that bear did more wounds to that unit than the Free Folk Raiders did, which is huge for me. And the Mountains Men respond in kind by coming into my Free Folk Raiders. They don't hit a bunch. It was unfortunate for them because it's not that they failed their charge, they just got a disordered on a 2. But it doesn't stop me from losing a bunch of raiders to a panic check and failed armor saves. But I've still got the unit there, and that's all I really care about because I've got I've got a pretty thick stack of cards in my hand from the first turn, being able to grab that tactics position, that I can start to make some of these multiple engagements function. And you can see now how the bears are really a big part of the Free Folk new plan. Or not new plan, it's just their old plan. They just didn't have a great way of doing it. But now you can see like things like distraction tactics, and there's too many. Those are cards that I really didn't like playing a whole lot, but now I really enjoy having them when I have skin changers around, because those bears, they get in and they start kicking those numbers up. Plus the guaranteed wound, well, kind of guaranteed wound, and vicious is super huge for them. I think it's a great deal there. Like 1 point for those is perfect. So I've got Sire ready to go on these Free Folk Raiders that are coming in. Like, I plan to just demolish the Warrior Sons here, even if they decide to use their Faith Point for their new shield rule. So they try to get in. Or no, this was me taking the combat position with the bear, because I didn't want my opponent to take it first and then lose the Free Folk Raider unit that was in there. So the best thing I had to do was use the bear to attack the side of the Warrior Sons. They do pass their morale, which is, whatever. I wasn't looking for lightning to strike twice or anything, but taking out at least one more of those guys works for me. And then the Flayed Men, as I expected them to in hindsight, decide to take the objective on the side, and that shuts off Sire, so now he's not really doing anything for the raiders that are there. I go for the charge, I roll a cock die first, and then next I roll a 1, which for them, based on where they were positioned, is just enough for them to not make it. And then for their panic test, they end up passing barely. Yeah, I'm pretty sure they passed. They might have failed it. It looks like they failed by 2. Maybe I was just too quick or edited it out. But that was unfortunate for me, because I've got a lot of great Tormund cards and great Free Folk cards in my hand that could really be doing a lot of work right now. But if it's not me getting chunked up on the positioning of my own bears, it's me failing charges. So Harma's unit and her bear end up getting positioned a little differently. She ends up using Follow Me on him because Walder Frey isn't influencing him right now, or isn't influencing them right now, to get the bear to move up a little further, which is cute. It's a nice trick. And then I get into the Flayed Men and just do my 1 wound, which I'm happy to do. Or, you know what? No, I think maybe they didn't make the wound and that the bear rolled a 1 and rolled a disordered charge. So it is what it is. But they're engaged now. Not like they were going far anyways. But I think this is, if you look at the top and the bottom of the screen, my opponent and I are kind of in the same position where he's scoring points with Flayed Men, which is, good for him. And I'm scoring points with Tormund, which is really good for me because I get 2 instead of 1. But the issue is we've paid so many points for those units and put so many resources into them that we're not really getting to utilize them a whole bunch. So with something like my Harma list, where that one's a little bit more wide than this one, which I do need to think about now that bears kind of sit in a weird position, but they can always deploy behind the skin changer unit. It's not a big deal. I think she might be decent for this scenario just because I can put whatever dork I want to on there, and her unit isn't all about getting a bunch of work done, and she can do work with her order when other units are going in, so she might be a little bit better served on a scenario like this. So my cave dwellers on the upper screen do get into the Mountains Men. They didn't make a success. Well, the charge was successful, but it was disordered, so they couldn't they couldn't use any of the cards that I've been hanging on to. Like I said, I had a massive stack of awesome stuff to use, but every time I wanted to do something with it, the charge failed and nothing came up out of it. So the footage from that last turn thing, like I'm still getting used to this, so you'll have to bear with me. I still think the image is cool, but it was a little bit more of a maybe a spoiler. Maybe I should just block that out or something. But the uh, the cave dwellers did a significant amount of damage to those mountains men, and then I think the mountains men decided to respond by trying to kill the unit of raiders that was engaged with them. They only needed to get 4 wounds through, which they ended up doing. It wasn't too difficult for them, even with low ranks. I think I think it was a couple sixes and then maybe a failed panic test or something that came out of that to make it happen. But now you'll get to see where my problem is with the cave dweller savages and the bear that's down here. I tried to make it so that maybe I could run past it or do something else past it, but it didn't. Just wasn't going to happen. So the other bear decides to charge in. He makes the charge and he connects with the hit and makes the wound. They're panicked because we haven't been keeping the greatest track of Joffrey's panic tokens, so that came on afterwards. The flayed men do fail their panic test, which I'm super happy about because it means that I get the objective and can shut Walder Frey off. So now I'm kind of safe for right now in terms of getting Waldered, which I think it's not terrible for me in this list because I've at least got a symmetrical presence to where no matter which unit he shuts off, there will be other units doing what they want to do. But now the flayed men get a chance to swing into bears, and I don't expect the bears to survive, but it's I can hope. I'm not quite sure what the one die roll was for. I'm trying to remember, but I can't recall. Oh, now I remember. I think I might have played distraction tactics because the 2 bears are there, and then my opponent counterplotted it. So my bear exactly dies. So if I would have just rolled 1 better, he'd have been okay. Which is funny, but doesn't really change much what's going on here. He ends up getting the objective back and shuts Styre off again, so I'm a sad free folk player once more. I end up taking the crown, and I believe I zap. It might be the Mountainsmen unit that I zap because it's just there's so few of them left, and having the corpse pile there makes it so it's pretty low hanging. So I can just get in and take care of them and get them off the table. So my opponent then, now that the warrior sons are free, decides to charge into the raiders that are in front of him. It's just they're a little less threatening this way too, and then those cave dwellers won't be able to get in on. It'll be harder for them to get on because they've got a long bomb another charge through a corpse pile, which I don't think they can actually get through. And I know you've probably already noticed, but we've got a migrating tactics board again. With the setup with that little track, I think things get a little tight. So the backs of our tables look a little more messy, and I'm running out of space with that thing, so I have to kind of reconfigure my setup a bit to make it all work. But the warrior sons do all right. Their output isn't super great when they're down ranks. Like, it's all right, but it's just not awesome. It's definitely enough to kill those raiders, though, because they failed enough saves and then failed their panic by rolling a 3 on the D3 that it wiped them out completely. The warrior sons in kind, they take a couple wounds from the objective that they're holding, but they're fine with it. They're just sitting there, and now they're not in the safest space in the universe, but it's not like they're in the worst spot either. So Tormund's unit's just kind of dirtling up the table, sinking some activations into that and getting his bear in front. I think that side of the table is pretty much, mine forever because there's just nothing over there to threat me. And my opponent is running out of options to do things, but I am too. I've got the cave dwellers are kind of bricked back there, and Tormund is super bricked. But the Fen and the cave dwellers on the bottom are just kind of, now it's getting to the point where now when Walder Frey shuts something off, it really hurts. But again, the flayed men aren't really going much of anywhere. And I know it looks like I forcefully threw a card, but I have the updated flayed men card, and I just happened to notice it, so I gave it to my opponent. Now Walder Frey is... I'm trying to zap Walder Frey off the Fen unit because I would like to use Harma's ability to get her to get those cave dwellers up further, but my opponent opts to discard a card, and I think it might have been Adaptive Tactics or something like that. It was a good card, so I'm happy that it's gone, but I'm also like bummed that Harma can't do what she wants. So now I've decided to move Harma in a way that gets her a little closer to the Warrior Sons, but I did so in a way that makes it so that the Warrior Sons had just a small amount of her trait in their line of sight. So that's not good for me. It was a bad move. I could have easily positioned them to where the Warrior Sons wouldn't be able to get a bead on them. So now the Warrior Sons have to look for a 3 to make that charge because they're down to speed 2. And my opponent doesn't make it. So they just get to move a couple inches. They probably could have moved a little bit more, but I think he was fine with what happened there. He does get another faith token though, but honestly, the Warrior Sons in terms of like performance, in this list I just don't think they're doing it for me. Like I believe when I first saw the Warrior Sons change, I was like, well, thank Cool Mini or not for changing those guys, because they definitely needed some help. But now after seeing them played, I think this is the second time I've seen them in the game, I just don't know if it was a good change. I think it kind of set them back a little bit. I don't know if they really fit a role, especially at 8 points anymore. It just doesn't feel good to me. They don't feel good to me is really what I'm looking at. So Harma's unit, even though they're, hurt by Walder Frey, they still get the charge. They're still throwing 8 dice, hitting on 4s, but I think they were another one that got a disordered charge. So they weren't able to reroll, so I think they only hit like 4 or 5. The Warrior Sons, though, well, maybe it was a ton that they hit, but the Warrior Sons didn't make really any of their saves, so Harma was able to take that objective and back up. So now things are really sketchy because my opponent's kind of chunked up. His flayed men are chunked up. They're going to have a hard time getting to Harma's unit, and the bear is kind of keeping him in place too. And if the flayed men come out, those cave dwellers are going to be right there to try and take a hold of the flayed men from the side. So he's kind of pinched in a weird spot, while I get to maintain dominance on the top of the table. The Preston Greenfield crossbowmen, they shift up and take a shot. They decide to eat the D3 wounds, or D3 plus 1 wounds, just because they need to get those shots in, and there just hadn't been a really good opportunity for my opponent to give up an NCU or a unit's activation to punch the spike pit. So okay, so things got a little weird. The battery died on my camera and I didn't notice. Usually I'm pretty good about being able to pay attention to that, but it just fell off. So things that transpired, Harma's unit got blasted off by those crossbows after 2 shots that they had taken. They did end up losing a bunch to just the spike pit. So with that, a cunning ploy had happened that stopped my cave dwellers from going in on the flayed men, so my other unit of cave dwellers just had to run across the table so they could get to the crossbowmen, because not that they were a problem, but they were low enough on dudes now, or wounds, that I could get some easy points off of those, because I think my opponent right now is sitting at 6 or 4, or no, he's sitting at 5 I think right now, and I'm sitting at 6, so I've got a decent lead on him, and Tormund's been a real big part of that. But he's got the ability to kind of catch up if I mess up. So cave dwellers make it in. I think they're being influenced by Walder Frey right now, so they don't get to do any of their fun stuff. And the flayed men don't seem to really care about the attack at all. I think they ended up staving a lot of it off because the rolls weren't super great. And then my opponent decides to take the combat zone, and it looks like the flayed men are going in on the cave dwellers, and I think we lose quite a bit on this attack. or no, maybe we used a weakened token. No, we didn't get to. That was some other. That was probably while the camera was dead. But we lose a decent amount of cave dwellers. Not a ton, but at least there's still 6 of them there, which I can, it's not terrible. One of the biggest bummers about this is the way that I've set myself up with blocking myself with skin changer bears and failing all these unfortunately timed charges is that I haven't really gotten a lot of chances to use the tactics cards that are at my disposal. So I haven't been able to push in ways that I want to, but every time at least I'm recognizing the bear problem for myself, because I think once that's kind of solved and I've worked the kinks through it, the free folk deck just like turns on like wildfire once you start using those bears properly. I think the key is to probably alternate where they position. Like, don't put a bear right by the unit that it's attached to. Like, maybe space it out by 1 unit, so that way you can move the bear so it's not hindering the unit that moved before it, and then can position it to where you need to so that the other unit isn't getting blocked up by it either. So I think that's the key, at least, is my armchair theory idea. I guess not armchair because I've played it, so it's not terrible. But cave dwellers are still taking casualties, and I think this is the turn they get toasted. So that puts my opponent up another point, and that's one of the unfortunate things about having the flayed men go in, or not flayed men, but the cave dwellers go in like that. They had to do something, but part of me thinks it might have been better for them to just turn around and grab the objective that's in the middle of the table. So now we're getting to the nitty-gritty parts of the game. I think we're winding down here. I think Tormund's kind of spent most of his turns getting alternately crown zapped, dropping the objective, and then going to get it again. His little bear is just kind of hanging out as far as he can at like max range, so he doesn't get out of the 12 inches of the skin changer. He's just kind of holding the position, which is unfortunate for me because that bear really could be the one getting to the middle of the table to get that objective. But the problem is the range, right? Not that I think that that's like a big downside of the skin changers. It's really not a big deal. I think they're still a great unit, and now I just have to figure out whether I'm buying 2 boxes of them or 3. So this is last turn I pitched my whole hand. I had awesome cards, and I'm like, Brian, you're not getting a chance to use these. And then one of the first cards that I pull up is Endless Horde. So my opponent tries to stop it with a counterplot. He doesn't have the crown though, and that he rolls a 1 on it, so it doesn't get him what he needs out of it. So Harma's unit gets to come back, and even though Harma's not in it anymore, she's kind of eyeballing the objective to go up to. We did kind of say to my opponent that maybe Joffrey could have come down first, or I think he might have noticed it, that Joffrey should come down first so that he can get that reroll on counterplot to make sure it goes off, because I think my opponent right now is at 7 and I'm at 9, maybe even 8, so the gap on us closed up pretty quick. And then, so if that counterplot goes off, I think it could drag out to turn 6 because the scoring options are so limited, and my opponent's able to grab some points here and there. But with Harma having come onto the table, it's going to be really difficult for my opponent to kind of get that objective away from me, especially since Walder Frey isn't able to influence them since he's already on the board. I think they did a wound to Tormund's unit or something and shut him down. So I think the last play for my opponent is to take Joffrey and put him onto the crown. And his goal here is to try and zap Tormund off the objective, because then that for sure takes it to turn 6. But Joffrey comes down, Right now, I'm only -1 because I'm far enough away from the corpse pile, and end up rolling that 8 in order to keep Tormund alive, or not alive, but keep the objective on him, since he had to activate already, and I didn't have any way to get him back onto it. So that was the run of the game. If you have any questions, post them in the comments below. Make sure you subscribe to the channel if you want to see more from us, and the notification bell is going to let you know when I post things too. Otherwise, keep an eye out for more A Song of Ice and Fire content, and I think we're going to start dabbling into a few other things here pretty quick.